And now I sign legislation which takes a sledgehammer to another wall.
The ADA is a landmark civil rights bill that was signed into law by President George H.W. Bush on July 26th of 1990.
We will not accept, we will not excuse, we will not tolerate discrimination in America.
It is the most comprehensive of our nation's disability laws, guaranteeing individuals with disabilities the right to receive reasonable accommodations in order to work and live, and the right to participate in all aspects of society. In effect, it makes discrimination based on disability illegal. The ADA was the final result of smaller legislative victories. The Architectural Barriers Act of 1968, the Urban Mass Transit Act of 1970, the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, including Section 504, the Education of Handicapped Children's Act in 1975, now known as the IDEA, the Air Carriers Act and the Fair Housing Amendments Act, both in 1988. Each of these laws secured specific rights for people with disabilities, and together they led to the 1990 passage of the ADA.
Broke my neck in 1986. I was upright walking and was in a diving accident trying to impress the girl I was with, and boy was she impressed. Imagine a world where a guy who uses a motorized wheelchair cannot access a curb ramp, must ride in the streets to go everywhere.
You couldn't cross the street, you couldn't go to a store, you couldn't go to the movies. You couldn't visit friends.
There is no such thing as accessible buildings. There is no transportation service of any kind. You're excluded from 90% or more of all activities that humans engage in.
Well, I remember that back in those days, I had a guide that had been put together by someone with a disability in Florida called the Roll-In Shower Guide, which is what I would use to find hotels that actually had accessible showers. Nowadays, as time has gone by and the ADA has really had a significant impact on accessibility, I don't need that at all. There's much more access.
And we talk a lot about in-home care and getting in-home care. And I remember when Bruce and I first started dating, and it was before the ADA, and him saying, they've turned my home into a nursing home. It wasn't any different, even if you got in-home care, if you can't leave your house. You can't get on a bus. There was no place to go. And when you showed up, people got annoyed.
In the United States, 12.6% of the adult population has a disability, equal to 41 million people. 1 out of 4 adults over the age of 65 has a disability of some type. So you or someone close to you has a pretty good chance of being part of that 24.4% of older Americans. Whether your disability is acquired or has been part of you since birth, the ADA ensures you can go to the places you want to go or do the things that you have always done, and you have the right to demand change if either of those things doesn't happen.
I remember that there was a lot of excitement about the idea that there could be a wide sweeping civil rights law for people with disabilities, and that we were really on the forefront of that effort. I remember being in Washington, I think twice, possibly more times, lobbying with various groups for that law. And there was a lot of excitement around that law, and things were really looking possible. And so I think there was just this sense of that something really big was going to change.
We had very high hopes. I was actually newly disabled then. The people who didn't have, who were new at having disabilities, or who had lived some life without having disabilities, had one set of expectations that things would go back to the way they were. All of our barriers would be erased. People who had always had disabilities, I think, didn't know what to expect. In those days, we had a bumper sticker that said, to it said the ADA, and then it said to boldly go where everyone else has gone before. So it was a new frontier, and we didn't really know what to expect. We just knew what we had wasn't equitable, and we didn't like it, and we wanted it changed.
We are seeing changing perceptions that a disability is not a tragedy, but instead is part of the unique aspect that defines each individual. The ADA has created a systemic shift that has made things better for all of us.
Even before the ADA, we've always been important. We just really hadn't accepted it or thought about it or realized it. And then the ADA helped us to feel that we could be a viable part of contributing to the world and to society. And that's what we want as just human beings. We want to be part of the world. We want to be part of the human race, and not just be part of it. We want to be able to contribute to it. And the gifts that we bring to the world are changing the world.
For me, it's all about integration, and kind of integration in two different meanings. One is specific to things like nursing homes and Olmsted, which has been so important to getting people out of nursing home situations and into the community. And also integration, meaning having an accessible society that allows people with disabilities to go to restaurants with their friends, or, you know, we do a lot of work on making sure curb ramps are accessible. Being able to just use the city sidewalk system is absolutely fundamental to have a job, or to meet with people, or to get to a bus stop, or whatever you can think of. So both of those things, I think, are examples of how important the ADA is to our community.
You know, I would just sort of echo that from the perspective of someone who does not have a disability. For me, it's been very important that I can go places with my husband, that I can go places with a wider circle of friends with disabilities. That I regularly can co-counsel cases with attorneys with disabilities and be certain that the courtrooms and meeting places and other places that we go will be accessible, and that generally it broadens the scope of everyone who can participate together in a community, which doesn't just benefit people with disabilities, it benefits the entire community.
The ADA is so important to our community of disabilities. A major piece of legislation signed in 1990 covering all mental and physical disabilities, deaf, blind, intellectual disabilities, mobility, cancer, cerebral palsy, all forms of physical and mental disabilities. And it has very important provisions that we all rely on. It protects against retaliation for people who have complaints that arise from discrimination barred by this very important piece of legislation.
In January 1990, I was still fairly new to the disability community. I was a new spinal cord injury. At the time, my limited understanding of the ADA was that it would help people with disabilities better be able to get jobs and better be able to find places to live. It probably has a lot to do with the reason that I was able to be successful. I am very fortunate that it was passed, and I'm very thankful that it was passed. And as a recipient of many of the benefits of it, I'm thrilled I was able to go on and get a master's degree and have a career in corporate America before I came to work for Ccdc. But it's been an equalizer, and for that, I'm thankful.
The ADA has made a ton of changes in society. It has enabled people with disabilities to use all kinds of businesses and services that we've never been able to use before. And that's anything from, you know, like using buses. That's been a big part of the ADA, is our ability to travel, getting into restaurants, going to movie theaters, well, before COVID, going to movie theaters, doing all kinds of things that we've never been able to do before. Those have been groundbreaking and huge changes. And it's helped not only us, but other people. There's something called the curb cut effect that shows, and curb cuts are those little cutouts and sidewalks that everyone uses, bicyclists, people with strollers. When things are made accessible for us, they're made better for everyone.
And the ADA is the law that allows us to say, okay, this service, this business is not accessible for this reason, and we would like to make a change. And sometimes that results in a reasonable modification. Other times it results to a change in policy and a change in local laws that then give us more rights. And so by doing that, we're making society and the world around us more accessible for everybody, so that people who are injured don't have to worry about how am I going to still do the things that I love to do. People that are, as they age, will theoretically be able to age in place and not have to go to a nursing home in most instances. And so the ADA allows us to build a much more equitable society.
We got to go to our grandson's 4th birthday party at a park, and Bruce could go and be there like any other grandpa and watch his grandson catch his first fish, because we had access to that park. We had a parking space, we had a curb cut, we had a gazebo that was wheelchair accessible. We just have the same life as everyone else. We're not very special. To me, the community is about just having a typical life.
Every day, the Colorado Cross Disability Coalition offers people with disabilities help with many things. For example, knowing what your rights are with regards to workplace accommodations, or showing you how to access services in the most integrated settings. And in some cases, we will even help you draft a written request. Ccdc provides guidance if you think a law has been violated and gives explanations of what you can do to solve the problem yourself.
In 1988, that range, I was the president of the board of an organization called the Community Resource Center. And one of the things that CRC did was to incubate fledgling nonprofit organizations that didn't have the financial resources to be able to purchase their own office space, etc. One of those organizations that was fledgling, starting from totally grassroots, was started by a woman named Jean Parker.
CCDC came into being through kind of this organic process. We were working at the time with the Community Resource Center. They did a lot of mentoring of the people, the first group of us who began CCDC.
Jean had a vision to create a cross disabilities organization that would be an advocacy group and a policy group and would really take on the establishment. The idea was unique. Cross disabilities meant all sorts of individuals throughout the state of Colorado that had disabilities. And it was an exciting idea.
The concept of cross disability back then was a new concept. Before that, people were really stuck in sort of paradigms and different turfs based on a variety of things. But what we saw with that was that it divided people. And instead, we had a lot more in common when we looked at our strengths. CCDC really understood that it was important to promote independence, self-reliance, and full participation by people with disabilities.
It started kind of as an outgrowth of the need to activate the Americans with Disabilities Act. We had this law, and so then it became time to, okay, what do we do now to begin to chip away at the kind of discrimination that this law was created to prevent?
We were in an office building that was a pretty funky building. In the winter, the heat didn't work, and in the summer, the air conditioning didn't work.
Our first office was on East Colfax, and there were regularly mice visitors, and we were pretty used to it.
And it was a building that eventually got torn down because it was such a dump.
It was bad. Best thing they ever did was say, we're going to kick you out of here.
But the great thing about the building was it housed about 4 or 5 different groups or agencies of people that worked for disability rights.
We had a lot of fun in those offices. We had a couple different ones within the same block area.
And we were going to change the world, and we did.
Grassroots organizing seeks to use the power inherent in a group by tapping into the skills of each person in order to achieve a result that no individual could accomplish by acting alone. By combining people with similar interests and situations, individuals can find the strength to fight against injustice. This type of mobilizing of forces can take many forms. It can be anything from organizing an educational campaign, circulating a petition, showing up at a hearing, leading protests, and even, yes, civil disobedience. CCDC believes in grassroots organizing and will always seek to encourage people who are directly affected by the issues. We work to build more leaders from within our community and enable individuals to solve their own problems.
CCDC, when it began, did a lot of direct actions. That was the primary external activity of the organization, was direct action. There were so many ways that people with disabilities were excluded from society, and some of them really lended themselves to direct action.
After the ADA was passed, CCDC made an important decision, which was to sue the Colorado Capitol, which was not fully accessible.
There were seven people in total who sued the legislature and the state and everything, to get access to the Colorado State Capitol. After that was done and the court order was carried out, or was in the process of being carried out, at some point there was a dedication of the new accessibility ramps and so forth that had been installed. Scott McVeigh was a member of the disability community in Colorado, and he was sort of a legislative junkie. He spent a lot of time at the Capitol talking with this, that, and the other legislators about all kinds of laws that were passing and regulations and so forth. He used a wheelchair. He was pretty severely disabled. Never was able to get into the House or the Senate chambers during his time at the Capitol. Sometime prior to the trial that ended up in the Capitol becoming accessible, Scott was found dead in his apartment. When we had the dedication, Kathy Vincent, who was the board president of CCDC at that time, she brought Scott's photograph up to the top of the ramp into the Senate chamber where he had never been able to go before.
Some of the common problems we realized needed really systematic solutions, and that out of that is what developed into two different types of advocacy. We had individual advocacy as compared to systems advocacy.
As the founding director, I'm very proud of what CCDC has accomplished all of these years. I look at it as a success and as a really important case study and symbol of what can be accomplished with commitment, with unity, and with a plan for moving forward.
It is no coincidence that along with the ADA, CCDC is also celebrating its 30th anniversary this year. Starting from extremely humble beginnings and is now an amazing, powerful statewide organization, CCDC is unafraid to tackle some of the most difficult challenges. What was originally built on the sweat equity of just a few people has grown into a nonprofit deserving of recognition.
When Jean left CCDC as the originator, she was followed by Julie Riskin as the executive director. And what Julie has done with CCDC is turned it into a real powerhouse, a statewide recognized organization that takes on oppression and the civil rights of individuals with disabilities and doesn't hesitate, if needed, to get involved legally in suing companies or governmental agencies or whatever that are really violating what the ADA is all about.
Julie was a volunteer for many years before her position became a paid position, which was very appropriate considering how hard she worked.
There was hardly an office for her to work out of, and there definitely was not any money for her to work with. There's so many times I have had the opportunity to be beside Julie in a meeting or beside her when she's talking to news reporters, and just that energy that comes from her and from the people she hires and all the people that she gets involved with. It is amazing.
We kind of stumbled along for many years. And I was on the board, I was the treasurer, finally got elected to be board president. One day, Julie says to me that we need to do an executive director evaluation. That's one of the things that boards have to do. Okay, I don't plan to do that. So I looked it up on the internet and found out here's what you got to do. And so I looked at all the things that Julie was supposed to be doing as executive director, and she was 10 out of 10 rating on just about everything. And then as I was going through looking at the websites, I saw one that says evaluate a board. So I looked at that. Oh my God, we're not doing any of these things. You know, we are nothing but Julie's fan club. We are supposed to be out raising money so that she can do the things that she's supposed to be doing as an executive director.
I joined the CCDC board 10 years ago, and I remember my first visit to a board meeting with all of these very passionate advocates for people with disabilities and issues pertaining to disabilities. And I could tell immediately that I might be able to take my business skills and help the organization grow and stabilize and bring a different perspective to the board.
We moved to Denver from Washington, D.C. in 1995. And I have a very specific memory that I came out here on a trip ahead of Tim to look for an apartment. And I was driving around looking at different apartments, and I was driving down I-25, and I heard Julie Riskin interviewed on the radio. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, this Colorado Cross Disability Coalition, this sounds so cool. We absolutely have to get in touch with them as soon as we moved to Denver. And we did. When we decided to quit our jobs simultaneously and start a small law firm to do ADA litigation, Julie was one of the first people we told. And I loved her reaction, which was, I'll drive the getaway car.
So picking up on that chronology, one of our first clients was Ccdc. And and Julie felt like we needed to get formal approval by the board. So Amy and I did a presentation to the board, and then we left the room and the board met and voted to retain us. And Julie came out and gave us as our official retainer fee a lollipop. And we've loved that. I think it still is in existence someplace.
The best retainer we've ever gotten.
Yes.
CCDC's legal program may be able to help you enforce your rights when you are denied access to services or facilities in violation of the ADA. They also provide training so that you can join the fight for equality. People say that lawsuits are not the answer, yet we at CCDC disagree. We are always happy when people will voluntarily do as they should, but we have 3 branches of government for a reason, because with the passage of any law comes a need for enforcement. We have to act if we are to keep our rights.
I had moved to Denver, Colorado. At the time, I was 19 years of age. So I'd already gone back to college, I was injured when I was in college. But I'd gone back to college, and I transferred to University of Colorado at Denver, finished a political science degree. I had to figure out a career for myself, so I chose law school. And when I chose law school, I had the great fortune to meet Julie Riskin. I was very impressed with how remarkably enthusiastic she was and the energy that she had. I learned how to make friends and influence people because I wrote a approximately 45 letters to my law school. How to make friends and influence people is filing a lawsuit against your own law school. So I did that, and then I met Julie Riskin. Julie told me that she had done everything in her power to meet with every law firm that she possibly could, and God knows there are many of them in Denver, Colorado, and none of them were willing to take on ADA cases. And there's a very simple reason for that. Most people with disabilities don't have a whole lot of money, so they're not paying clients. So what does Ccdc do to uphold the ADA? They find some punk like me who's a pissed off cripple with a law license. I didn't know I was a disability rights activist. It just worked out that way. I created the civil rights legal program for Ccdc for the sole purpose of enforcing the ADA, because no one would bring cases for people with disabilities who could not afford lawyers. You don't get to make decisions about the lives of people with disabilities without including people with disabilities. We have a bad tendency of knowing what we need. That's what Ccdc stands for. It's the greatest part of Ccdc.
I got involved in advocacy out of selfish greed to make the system better for myself. And that was truly my intent, was to fix some problems for myself and then move on and go on my life. Mostly the system worked. The system that had been built over the years worked really well, but it fell apart for me in my late 20s. And it was Ccdc that was at every table. Every meeting I went to, every person I called, the question always was like, you talk to Ccdc, are you working with Ccdc? And it became obvious that if you wanted to get things done in Colorado, you worked with Ccdc. And so I got involved with Ccdc and got to know Julie and ended up joining the board about 2 years later, and spent almost 8 years on the board of directors for the organization. But also was really involved in the volunteer advocacy side. It really showed me what community can do together that you can't do alone. When you go at it alone, you will minimize the amount of success you'll have. You need allies, and that includes individual allies as well as organizational allies. And that's really what Ccdc brings to the table.
We started off as really a mostly volunteer-run organization. Not a lot of difference really between the board and the staff, and we've grown into a nonprofit parlance organization that's kind of between adolescent and mature, where we have a fantastic board of directors that is truly a governing board. We have a paid staff now that is really pretty fantastic.
We've all struggled. We've all had disappointments in our life. We've all had successes in our life, and we realize that the only way we're going to get through this struggle called life is together. And so what we've done what Julie's done a phenomenal job of is educate herself and surround herself with a bunch of people that are educated in many different ways. We're a very diverse organization. We're a very respectful organization, and we help people with disabilities to advocate and to help learn to advocate for themselves, which we think is one of the most important things.
Ccdc employs people with disabilities. It's a non-profit organization that runs for and by people with disabilities. We advocate for people with disabilities. We advocate for the ADA. We advocate for compliance of the rights of people with disabilities at all levels. It gives me a community. It gives me a workplace. It gives me something to look back when I'm old and say, I made a difference.
As I have been part of Ccdc's board, as well as I run a nonprofit where I help abuse survivors with disabilities, one of the things that I have learned is that when it comes to ADA, every step is a battle. In every single sector is a battle. This is why Ccdc's work is so pivotal.
As a veteran with disabilities, I'm also a parent with a child that has disabilities. And because most of our disabilities are invisible, I know that I can make a change within CCDC, and I know CCDC is the right place and has the right mission to be able to make sure that everyone has those ADA rights.
Everyone should join CCDC, and it's free, because that's how we build power as a community, and we need to build power to achieve our objectives.
One of the most effective organizations for changing policies, changing laws, changing the hearts and minds of the people who make decisions about our lives. You know, we've made tons of changes. How many settlements? How many trials? Too many to count.
Whenever in a society that we help to uplift those who are struggling, who are labeled, who are marginalized, whenever we help those individuals, we're helping each other, we're helping the world, we're helping the society as a whole. We're helping to make this a better place for everyone to live in.
So the ADA is turning 30, and this is a significant milestone in life. And along with the ADA is the ADA generation. People in their 20s and 30s who have never known the world before the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act. They are filled with expectations of success, with the belief that of course they can do whatever they want and will be whoever they choose. And they know that there are laws designed to give them access and civil rights. It is up to each of us to ensure progress continues so all businesses, employers, governments, etc. understand that basic accessibility is simply part of life. It is not something different to be provided to a special individual. And the ADA has been a trailblazer. We have made great progress, but people with disabilities are still far behind on many measures, including employment, financial equality, health equity, and people with disabilities who are also Black, Indigenous, or a person of color experience discrimination on multiple fronts. So how can we as a society keep the ADA relevant into its 30s, 40s, and beyond? The best way is to promote integration. Involve people with disabilities as employers, employees, government officials, customers, passengers, co-workers, everywhere and in all aspects of life. The ADA generation and your generation, whichever one you belong to, must continue to forge ahead and carry the torch passed to us from the many pioneers who came before. We invite you to join us by adding your voice to ours. Every person who speaks with us adds strength and impact to the message we bring. You can sign up for a free membership or get involved through a myriad of volunteer opportunities. And yes, you can support us financially as well. Your donations, along with our sweat equity, goes a long way to making true and sustainable change. And as we have seen lately in the political world around us, it doesn't take much to lose the strides that we have made. So, happy birthday to the ADA and to CCDC. We celebrate all that has changed and all that has yet still to come. From all of us at CCDC, we thank you for your support.
So I want to say happy birthday to the ADA.
Happy anniversary to ADA and happy anniversary to CCDC.
As relevant in 2020 as it was in 1990, if not more so.
Thank you for your work, and thank you for continuing of thinking of us.
30 years and still going strong.
Our lives would not be the same without you.
Congratulations, and I celebrate you in my heart and say thank you.
We are so glad you're around.
And we hope to spend many more years working with you all to promote disability rights and full inclusion.
May we not be needed in 30 years.
Thank you. Thank you to our allies, partners, and friends who are not present in the video, but are always in our thoughts. Without you, as a community, supporting the ADA, we would not be able to do the work that we must do. Thank you to our interviewees, Ashley Lewis, Brenda Mosby, Bruce Gogan and Robin Bulldog, Christina Johnson, David Henninger, Jean Parker, Joe Beaver, Jose Torres Vega, Josh Winkler, Julie Riskin, Kenny Maestas, Dr. Kimberly Jackson, Kevin Williams, Lloyd Lewis, Maria Manriquez, Tim Fox, and Amy Robertson. Thank you to Angela Nevin for the narration, Alexander Manis for the videography, and Melissa Baer for the music. Copyright 2020, Colorado Cross Disability Coalition.